Afternoon all. Hopefully you can all hear me. If you wouldn't mind just raising your hands on your control panel just so that I know that everyone can hear me. At least some of you can hear me. Excellent. Cool. That's brilliant. Thanks for the show of hands there. Right. So good afternoon all, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on 3ds Max and basically linking data to Max and why we use Max anyway. So you know, what's the purpose of the visualization software within our design suite? As you're probably aware, we've been running several sort of webinars on the various products within the suite. We've got some more coming up on Friday on Revit as well. We're going to be talking about some of the other products within the suite today as well and how they actually interact and the workflows which Autodesk have actually put in place to actually get us across into visualization. Now, you know, visuals sell, and it's one of the key features, especially for those of you that are listening that are aware of BIM and building information modeling. Being able to show a client what they can expect at whatever level of visualization, whether we're looking at some concept visualizations in 3D, all the way through to true photorealistic imagery. So hopefully this afternoon, by the time we're finished, you'll have a better understanding of where Max sits and also some of the workflows that we can use to actually move our design data across into the high-end style photorealistic tools. So a little bit about myself, for those of you that may not know me. My name's Simon Dickinson. I'm the BIM Technical Manager for Greytech. I've basically been working in industry for quite a while now. My main product is Revit, but I do also visualize my designs and my work as I go through as well. So I'm very much an advocate of BIM and very much been pushing BIM for the past 12 years. So good afternoon, everyone. So what is it that we get within our visualization? What was visualization? Now, originally, the whole concept of visualization was actually, it was a student project. It was actually a project to see if we could artificially simulate inside a computer system how light acts in the real world. Okay, so the teapot button that you see as your render icon within all products is there because the first item to be ray traced was actually a teapot. You can Google it. It's called the Utah teapot, quite a famous teapot. But it was the first item ever to be ray traced, and it's the reason why we've kept it in almost as a little bit of history. But back in the early days, they were very shiny, were our visualizations. They weren't necessarily photorealistic. We had a lot of shine to things. We used to put a lot of reflections in because we used to think that looked realistic. It didn't. It looked realistic in a computer sense of the world. But today, clients expect more. The level and the quality of the visualizations that we're actually seeing out there in the market are incredibly detailed. They're using some very high-end techniques as well. So we've got high dynamic range lighting. We've got cinematic effects. So we're actually using the same effects within our visualizations now that the film industry are using. We want it to be high definition, so we want HD videos. We want in 3D characters in there as well. Now, in the early days, the 3D characters were very, very rough and ready, and we used to have a lot of 2D imagery that we would put in there for our people. So you may have come across ArcVision content. Although it looks three-dimensional, it's actually multiple shots of 2D imagery. It's narrative. We're actually storyboarding now. We're making things entertaining. So we're actually looking at almost producing a production, yeah. And by adding in these visual effects, fog, glare, etc., we're able to really tell a story and really make people feel and believe that what we're actually creating, the visualizations that we're creating, are actually real. So what makes a good visualization? Okay, so I've got here, it says for everyone, and it's a list of the old tools. So this is for everyone. We would say that, you know, good composition, just like a good photographer, yeah? Storyboarding it, understand what it is you're trying to create. How do we create our camera moves? What lighting do we want? How do we actually get the lighting correct? Even to the point of compositing and editing the images and the animations at the end of it as well. Now, the list bit says for specialists. I've got compositing there, color grading, adding 3D people. These are all things that were very high-end and really specific to the real specialists out there. We've got tools now within 3ds Max to actually bring all of this now to us. Yeah, so anyone can now start to utilize these skills, even down to stereoscopy. You know, back in the 80s, we had the glasses. You could go see Jaws 3D with the dodgy blue and red glasses. We can do that in 3ds Max, but more importantly, we can also create HD 3D visualizations that we can run on our HD 3D TVs through 3ds Max now. And there's actually a stereoscopic camera preset and set up within 3ds Max 2016. So what do we mean by composition? Yeah, a photographer is very good at seeing angles and lines within scenes. So how we actually composite this. Quite often, if you, we do say that a photographer will always make a good visualizer, because all we're doing within the software is we're basically creating an artificial photo, really. So we need the skills to understand that. So if you've got a good eye for a photograph, you're going to have a good eye as a visualizer as well. You know, quite often most people have heard about the 2/3 rule. Yeah, 2/3 sky, 1/3 ground, or 2/3 ground, 1/3 sky. Again, it works fine within the way that we want to visualize. But the idea of following lines as well. So on this particular photo, the photographer's forcing you to look down the road. We're almost forcing you to look at what we want you to look at. So it's a very, very skilled set that we can actually force you to look at what we want. Subliminal selling is actually illegal, but we've actually got the ability to visualize from a visualization point of view to make you look at what we'd like you to look at. You know, looking at strong focal points of an image, so here we've got lines, and the lines again are trying to carry us down. So all them images that we've just seen flash up on the screen, they are all visuals, they are not real. Okay, how can we portray scale? So quite often I will add characters, 3D characters into a scene, just purely and simply so that I get an idea of scale within my visualization. Yeah. So the foreground elements there, like the bollards, etc., and the sign from the metro, that helps us to understand just how big the building is in the background. Okay. Don't just settle for the first shot that you get. A lot of people will actually put a camera in and go, yeah, that's the image that I want. But experiment. We don't need to render them out of the full quality. But you know, a photographer doesn't take just one photo and expect that to be the best shot. He's going to take several photos, and then he's going to choose the best ones. Now, we don't need to render them at full res to understand what the best shot is, but it's good to experiment. It's good to play. Put cameras in everywhere. Okay. Storyboarding. If we want to tell a story about a visualization. So maybe we're not just talking about creating stills. We're talking about creating animations here. So don't just go in and say, oh, I'm going to create a shot of that. I'm going to create a shot here. I'm going to create a video of me flying all the way around the building, which is probably the biggest no-no you can possibly do. But understand what it is that you're trying to achieve. I'm not meaning that you need to set up the level of quality that we've got here in the way that these are drawn. But what we do need to understand is we do need to understand how we're actually going to produce our animations. Okay, just mute that sound. Use different camera effects in there as well. So just let me just mute my speaker for that. Okay, so let's put this on. So here we have various different shot styles. So we're just zooming in gently. We're not flying around at 20 miles an hour trying to get everything in at the same time. Use these different effects, the scissor shots, etc. And again, this is all movie production skills which have been well documented over the years as well. You know, this shot here was actually inspired by Spider-Man, where he was running up the building, but that's actually a shot where we've actually used the same sort of cinematic camera effects to actually enhance our own scenes. Slow and gliding cameras work just as well for interiors. Yeah, so again, we're not doing fast shots, trying to show as much as we can in a short period of time. Interestingly enough, there is actually something that we call the 10-second rule. So each scene of animation, or between each shot, should be no more than 10 seconds. And that comes down to the fact that most of us have actually got about a 10-second concentration span. So if we do something that carries on for too long showing the same thing, there's a good chance that we're going to get bored and just switch off, and then other people are missing stuff at work we've already done. Lighting and reflections make it look real. What's going on here is we're taking a picture of a silver ball, which basically it's reflecting what's behind us. So we can actually use this to generate the reflections in our scene. And this is done quite a lot within the film industry. So if they're going to do any sort of CGI within a scene, they need to know that if they've got an object in there that potentially is going to be CGI and it's going to reflect, it needs to reflect the scene that it's placed in. So they will take these spheres and these light probes, and I'll show you how we can fake these as well later on, but they do give a really nice effect. Compositing the lighting effects can save time, and again, it's not essential, but what we've got here is a scene where we've actually taken the lighting and we've baked the lighting so we can apply the lighting back into our effect afterwards. And these are all really high-end sort of techniques, which again are very simple and easy to use within the software. You know, we've got something called color grading, which we can add as well. So we do this sometimes within our CGIs. So if we can add like a blue tint to it, so we change our color down so we actually make it a little bit colder, we can make things look cleaner, fresher. Okay. We can also warm images up as well. So quite often if you're using an incandescent bulb within a scene, so like a 100-watt bulb, we'd add in like a little bit of a yellow tint to that, so it gives it a warmer, homelier feel. And we can actually change the scene. If it's a hospital, we might want it to be a bit more cleansier, so we'll make it look a bit colder, but it'll just give it that cleaner look. 3D people are quite new, and as I mentioned before, they were quite scary originally. You notice quite a lot of the time here they're either blurred out or you're looking at the back of them, and it's just because they can look a little bit fake if we're not careful. A couple of years ago now, we had the Populate tools added into 3ds Max, and I'll show you how these work. These allowed us to simulate crowds and actually get plenty of people within our scenes very, very quickly to give our scenes purpose. And as I mentioned before, it also helps to give them scale. Okay. So, just to summarize, just before we go on and I start to show you how the software works. Yeah. The tools which have always been around for everyone, being able to get the camera shot correct, storyboard, look at how our camera moves, look at our lighting, and also the materials in some respect, and how we can actually edit our imagery. So, you know, don't be surprised if you hear people taking their scenes and their images that they've produced in 3ds Max and taking it across to something like Photoshop or some other photo editing software to actually add the extra level of depth into their images. But don't also be surprised if you find that general usage now, where we're adding in color grading, we're using these 3D people, and we're adding in various different special effects, even adding sound into our movies and our scenes as well, and especially now the stereoscopy as well. So adding in the idea of having a proper 3D image actually in there as well. So let's have a look at the software and how it actually works. So let's just minimize that. So here we have 3ds Max 2016, and I've already got a blank scene already open. Now what we can actually do in here is now we've actually got default scenes, so we can actually start off with a template. It's something that we've never had before really in Max, but we can now create various different templates. When you first launch Max, it will actually give you a start screen, a little bit like AutoCAD does now as well. I'm just going to come in and just check my unit setup because there's a few things just to be aware of. So I'm all working in millimeters at the moment, and when it comes to later on, when it comes to importing image models in from Revit, there's a few settings that we just need to be aware of, and I will talk you through sort of some of the things you do need to be aware of to get the workflows to work correctly. So this is 3ds Max, okay, and within Max we can actually create everything we need within Max. We can draw within Max. We've got a whole host of tools over here on our command panel. So we've got a create panel where we can create our standard geometry. So we can create things like boxes, spheres, cylinders, teapots, because of course everyone should have a teapot in their life at some point. Okay, so here's our teapot. Let's just make that nice and smooth. So 32 segments in there. Okay, so there's our teapot. And as I mentioned before, the reason the teapot's in there is purely historical. In fact, if you actually watch a bit of a geek moment, if you watch any of the Pixar films, the teapot appears quite a bit. So the teapot appears in things like Toy Story, A Bug's Life, Ants. It will always appear at some point in one of their films. It's a bit like the number, if anyone's seen the number that's in there. There's a particular number that appears constantly, and it's actually the room number of the original Pixar's design office. So what I can do is we can start to create objects in here quite quickly. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to create a quick scene so I can show you just how quickly we can actually utilize and operate with it within 3ds Max. So various different shapes that we can do to create our scenes. Whenever we create an object over on the control panel here, we can actually see the size of the object that we're creating. So it's about the right size for the real world. Okay, and we've got our teapot in our scene. So the main sort of concept of the way that we want to work is we have geometry, but we now want to create the real world scenario. Now, there's two predominantly different ways of working in Max. And within 2016, when you start Max, it will actually ask you which one you want to work in. So we've got the traditional way of working, which is very much the cartoon effect. So where we're looking at sort of creating animation, it's not photorealistic, it's not necessarily real world. We then have the design environment, which we can automatically set Max up to work in. Now, as soon as we do that, it will set certain presets. One, our materials will use what's called real-world coordinates. If I actually look on any of these objects, if we actually look on the Modify panel here, I've actually got Generate Mapping Coords, but I'm using real-world map size. So what that's doing is, it assumes that this wall is actually 5.5 meters, be just short of 400 mil, but just over 3 meters high. So that level of information is to scale. It means that when I apply an image to that, say like a piece of wallpaper, then I can actually set that wallpaper size to real world. If I was actually using the traditional way of working, then I might be just creating a scene, and I'm going to scale the images by my eye. So when it comes to setting the material size up, I'm the one that dictates the size of the material, not the real world. So the design environment is much better from a designer's point of view because we understand exactly how large everything is. Okay, so the first thing we've got is our geometry in there. The next thing I might want to do is I might want to create some lights in here. So as you can see here, I've got geometry, we've got some advanced geometry, we've got some lights, and we've got some cameras. So I'm just going to change my view. Okay, so what we have here is our quad views. So I can actually zoom out all of our windows, and I can now start to look at putting some lighting in here. So let's just have a couple of target lights. Now it says here, it says you are creating a photometric light. This light that I'm creating is a real world light. If I want this to have a 100-watt bulb in it, I can tell it that it's a 100-watt bulb. The amount of light that will be emitted from that 100-watt bulb will be exactly the same as what it would happen within the real world. We also have the benefit of being able to use within photometric lights, photometric webs. So quite often, particularly if you're using something like, say, Revit, and you're creating your buildings in Revit, if you download a manufacturer-specific light fixture, then that light fixture will probably already have attached to it the photometric web for that light. It means that not only is the light that's going to be emitted from that light correct, its spread and its area and its angle is correct as well. So all lights are actually tested to see where the dark spots are, what the light pattern is. That will be physically accurate here within 3ds Max. What we also have in here as well is we do have tools within 3ds Max to do lighting analysis as well. So we can actually start to put light meters down, and then we can calculate our exact lighting conditions within our scene. So this is going to be Fairwood. I like to change that now. So I'm going to enable my photographic exposure control, and I'm just going to put a couple of lights in here. Okay. Now, traditionally, when you actually use Max, one of the hardest things was always to get the lighting correct, because I don't really know what the lighting effect is going to be like on this. The only way I could actually find out what it'd be like is if I actually render that. Yeah. So you'd render your scene and you'd go, oh, the light's a little bit bright in there. But you'd have to render it. And yes, this is quick at the moment because it's just a very simple scene, but if you've got a complicated scene, it becomes very, very hard to understand how the lighting is going to work. So what we've got now is the way that the computer works is I can actually come in and I can set this to be realistic. So this is going to start to show me the scene as it would look. Notice the light's not quite right at the moment. That's because if I come to my lighting and shadows, it's currently using the default light. Now, depending on how the default light's set up, it's usually 1 or 2 lights just behind me. Whichever direction I'm looking, it's always throwing the light in that direction. So what I can do is I can actually come into my here and say, right, I want to illuminate with scene lights. And straight away we can see that it's way too bright, yeah? So the level of lighting there is too high. If I press number 8, which is the shortcut for the environment and effects, I can pull that up. And in here, I can do one of 2 things. I can simply just start to turn my exposure down, yeah? So we can start to turn this down until we get an acceptable light level within our scene. I could always, so as well, render a preview. This is a little bit of an old way of doing it now because I can actually do it in the scene. If you find that your machine's struggling to have the real world lights on in the actual scene, then you can hit the render button and it'll give us a quick render, and again we can start to adjust our exposure control here. If you understand how a digital SLR camera works, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with going to your photographic exposure control. We can change the shutter speed, the aperture, the film ISO, etc. as well. Okay. If I come further down, we can start to look at other different lighting effects in here. Image control, we can start to change the white point. So this is now where we can go from a bluey colour to a warmer scene. Yeah, so from 6500, yeah, you'll notice there we go, it's going a little bit more yellow. If you look at the preview up here, if I pull it down, I can make it go incredibly blue. Yeah. So let's just set that back to 6500 in this case. Okay. So we can start to change the appearance of this scene. So I've now got a scene with some lighting in. My shadows are just being shown a little bit bulky at the moment. That depends on how the shadows are being set up. Yeah, I'm using ray trace shadows in here at the moment. It's absolutely fine. So what I'm actually going to do now is I'm now going to start setting up some materials. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to launch my material library. Now, there's 2 material libraries actually available within 3ds Max now. So this is the compact editor. This is the old way of working. Now, for the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to use this one because it's easier to use when you've got a single screen. We also have the Slate editor. And the Slate editor it's easy to understand how the materials are working. And the reason that I say this is if I actually were to pull a material into here, so anything like, say, this ceramic porcelain, and we pull this one in, we start to understand what maps are linked in, etc. So I'll come on to how the materials work in a second, but it gives us a better understanding of how the materials are set up. Just so that it's a bit easier for me to work, because this takes up less space on my screen, I'm going to use the compact one. The concept behind the material is exactly the same. So I'm just going to select an empty swatch. So these are my materials, if you like. It's my artist's palette. I've got some templates in here that I can use. So what I want is, I actually want a nice red ceramic teapot. So I'm going to start creating some materials. So I'm going to come into here and I'm going to set this up to a glossy finish. And this will automatically now set my reflections, my glossiness, etc. The other thing I want to do is just set the colour in the correct place. So we'll just come into here and let's set up our colour. Okay. If I double click on the swatch, it will actually launch it and we can start to get an idea of how that was going to work. We can change the shape of that as well if we need to as well. Okay. To apply a material, I can select this and apply that to the selection, or I can actually drag and drop the material on there as well. Okay. So there's my material nicely on the teapot. I've got some walls in here and some floors, so let's set up one of these Arc and Design materials. The Arc and Design materials are very powerful. We've also got some presets in here. Look, so I can actually come in and say, right, satin varnish wood. Okay, this is already set up. It's got the values in. It's also got an M here. Where you see an M, in this box, it means there is a map. Now what we refer to a map, it's down here. Look, let me just go to my general map so I can show you that map. So this is the map that's actually this diffuse color map. Look, here's our diffuse color. So the diffuse color is what it is going to look like. So if I actually just go into the map so you can actually see what's set up in here. If I just view the image, here we have a JPEG. So this could be a JPEG that we've downloaded from the internet, it could be a sample, could be even a photograph that we've taken of the floor, and then we've used Photoshop and we've actually edited this. So I want to use real-world coordinates on here, so make sure that this is using the real-world coordinates. And if I come into here, we can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panels of wood. And if I assume that each one of them panels is 100 mil, yep, I know that that's going to be, say, width is going to be 600 mil wide. Yep, and I can assume, rightly or wrongly, that I'm going to say it's 1800 mil long. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm looking at this sample. I'm saying, right, in the real world, how physically big is that object? Okay, so we've now set that material up. There's probably a bump map in there. I just need to double check that we're not using, it's a mix, that's absolutely fine. So I've now set this material up. I'm just going to drag and drop it onto there. Now, that's just a bit brown. It doesn't really show me what it is actually that map is going to look like. So this JPEG that I've actually got, which is this one that we've just viewed, I can actually go and show shaded material in the viewport. Now, the nice thing about this is if I now change the scale of how this is actually working, the scale will actually change as well. So I can always see exactly how this image is going to look when I hit the render button. Again, depending on how powerful your machine is, you might struggle with this, but the system's now optimized so they can actually view this very well. Okay, and then we might want to put some materials on the wall. So I'm just going to start in here. I'm going to have a matte finish. Okay, and this time I want to put my own image on the wall. So I'm just going to go to this button here, and this is now allows me to put my my map. Now the map in here could be a bitmap, it could be some of these other special effects as well. So there's various different tools in here, everything from adding the smoke effect, just a specular highlight, noise, which is a random sort of gradient that we can in here, or a bitmap. Now the nice thing about the bitmap is it doesn't just mean bitmap, it means all image formats, yeah? And you'll notice that as well as it means images, it's also got here an AVI file. So it could actually be an animation. So say, for instance, you've got some plasma TVs on the wall in an animation and you're looking in a room, you can actually have videos playing on the TVs simply by adding an image on that's actually an AVI rather than a still image. We've also got MPEG, and that's listed in there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it all format. I'm just going to go into here, and hopefully I've got some wallpaper effects. Here we go. So I'm going to put this particular wallpaper. I can view this. So this is a tessellating piece of wallpaper. Now, basically, it maps. Yeah. So if we, what I mean by tessellate, if we mirror this left and right and top and bottom, it will actually quite happily duplicate this image. So I can have a look at that. It's a roll of wallpaper. So again, real world. I'm going to set this up at 900 mil. Be 900 mil. Okay. And we can then, again, assign this material to our surfaces. I can force it to show the material in there, and we can straight away look and make sure that this scene is looking the way that we want. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the top view. I just want to add a camera in there. I'm going to come out of these materials, these editors, just to make it a bit easier. So then we can look at cameras. Now, in here now we have the ability to add a free camera and a target camera. That's what we've always had. We've now got a physical camera. Okay. Now the physical camera has been developed in conjunction with Chaos. So if people don't know who Chaos are, they're the people that have developed V-Ray. And some people may or may not have heard of V-Ray. V-Ray is an additional render engine. So the render engine that by default that we'll be using within 3ds Max is called Mental Ray. The traditional way of working in here is using something called scanline. It's the way in which it calculates the light, and depending on how it calculates the light, it's going to give us slightly different effects. So the physical camera has been developed by Chaos. the concept behind this is it will actually allow us to set it up like a digital SLR. It makes it very easy to set depth of field in there, etc. So depth of field, that's where when you take a photo and the background's blurred, but the foreground's in focus, or you might have an object close to the camera that's out of focus, it gives us that effect. So it gives us a much better real-world effect. I'm actually just going to use the basic target one, okay? And what I want to do is I actually want to place a target camera in here, okay? So I'm just going to come into here and just maneuver my camera around, okay? If I come into this view and press C, it'll give me my camera shot. I can then start to maneuver where the camera is, right-click, select camera target, and I can then start to fully understand this scene, okay? So if I now hit render, let's have a look, see what we're looking at. So now, when I hit render, it will calculate the light correctly. It'll look at my reflections, okay? And as you can see, you're starting to get some reflections in here. The reflections are going to be quite dark because what it's reflecting is it's reflecting everything that's directly behind me. And basically what's behind me at the moment is nothingness. Yeah. So this is where, when we're on about getting the reflections right within your scene, is quite important. So what we can do is, I'm going to press number 8 again. This time it's not for the exposure, but it's actually for the environment. So number 8 fetches environment and effects. And up here, we've got the environment map. Okay. And what I can do is I can basically put this in here, and I can type in here background. And what we're actually after is the environment background switcher. Yeah. I could actually just get away with a background pro, but I'll show you what the switcher does. So if I put the background switcher in there, I'm just going to use my material editor to edit this. So we can use the material editor to edit anything that we put in where we've got something where it says map, etc. So in here I've got the ability to have a background. So this background could be a background image, a background photograph. But what I'm interested in adding is some environment reflections. Okay. And what I want in here is I actually want to add an environment probe, which is the chrome ball. And this can use, if I actually just browse this, it's actually looking usually for a HDRI image, so that's high dynamic range imagery. Basically that's an image that's been taken multiple exposures from dark to light, so depending on the lighting effect within my scene, that image can actually then adjust itself to give me the best match, if you like, for my exposure. If I just come into here, I've got some HDR probes, yeah, and I can basically choose one of these probes, and what that will do is it'll add in the background reflections. Yeah. So if I now come into here, and let's just open my render frame window. I'm just going to duplicate this view. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit render again. Yeah. So what we should now start to see, you can actually see already that the reflections are looking completely different, and that's because whatever that image is, and I'm not quite sure which one I chose. It's now starting to put, in fact there's some trees, look. So it's actually now starting to put some trees in the background. So even though I haven't created all that, I'm starting to add more realism to my scene. Okay. So this is the main sort of concept of the way that we're working. We have our model elements, we have our lighting, okay, and then we basically have the materials. And it's the lighting and the materials that actually make the scene, okay. And sometimes the level of modeling is important, but it's adding that extra detail in. Yeah. I often call, when I'm creating my scenes, I often add what I call scene junk. So that'll be a cup on a table, things that you would see in real life. Sometimes probably one of the biggest things and biggest mistakes most people make is that the scenes are too clean. They're a bit too clinical. Yeah, we need to have something in there to make it look more believable. Okay. There's various other tools as well that we have in here. Just before I go through and show you the workflows for getting our designs in from the other packages, we've got other tools available to us. And one of the ones that we've actually got is, if I can actually find where it's gone, is the Mass FX. Yeah, so I just want to launch Mass FX. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new scene. Let's just reset. Don't save that. Yep. Okay. So the problem I've got is, imagine I've got, let's just create a teapot. I'm just going to move that up off of the ground a second. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my teapot and I'm going to create 50 teapots, okay, just to give my machine a chance. So I've actually now got 50 teapots all stood in there. Now, we might want to have an effect. I'm just going to just undo that a second. We might want to be able to drop these. They could be suites. We want things to look more natural. And this is where Mass Effects come in. So Mass Effects is a physics engine. Imagine you want to have a building that you've designed be an existing building. You want that to blow up. You want it to collapse. You want it to be demolished so that from the wreckage of the old building, your new design can actually appear. Mass Effects allows us to do that. There's various different things in here. We've got things for soft bodies, heavy bodies. So this is a real-world scenario. So I can come in here and I can actually make this teapot what we call a dynamic body. Okay, and I'm going to now duplicate that, create an instance, and let's have 50 of them. Okay. So now I can actually simulate these objects. So these objects now will fall down. Okay. And it's calculated it, it's dropped them on top of each other, and it allows us to get a much more natural effect. So whether these are sweets in a jar, whether these are pencils dropped into a tub, etc., or whether it is actually a car driving down a road, hitting a ramp and taking off, then we've got real-world scenarios. Okay, there's various other tools in here for doing that as well. We've got particle systems that would allow us to generate really high-end smoke, liquid effects, pouring liquid, etc. Okay, so the software itself isn't just about being able to create pretty pictures. It's about creating animations and things like that. And we'll look at sort of how we can create some animations on some objects in a second. So let's just reset that a second. Okay, and let's go have a look at how do we get our designs actually in here now. So if I come down to the bottom, I've actually got Revit open, and here we have a Revit model. Okay. And if I go to my 3D view, here's the 3D view of the item that I want to get across. Now, just a little bit of a workflow and a little bit of information. Although I'm working in millimeters within Revit, so everything in here is in metric, Revit itself actually runs in feet. So you can take this object directly into 3ds Max as it is, but we sometimes get problems with the way that the map size works. So just as a little bit of information, just to make it a little bit easier, if I come into my unit setup, what I can do is I can work in millimeters within Max, but I can actually set my system units to be feet. Okay, so by doing this, it just means that when my model comes across, my map sizes are correct as well. The model will still dimension correctly when you fetch it across, but the mapping goes a little bit astray, especially on the real world map sizes. Okay, so I'm just going to let that set up now. That's fine. So what I can do is there's a couple of ways of getting your drawing, particularly from here into Max. What I could do is I can actually come in, I can import, and I can link a Revit file. So I can actually come into here, directly in here, and I can link an RVT file. I can link directly an AutoCAD file, yeah, and I can also link any other FBX file. Now the Revit, we can also export out from Revit to FBX, and this is the way that if you are working with a visualizer who, if you don't have Max but you're working with Visualizer, this is probably the best way to get your model to him. So we can come into here, I can go to export in Revit, and I can export an FBX file, okay? And we can save this file straight out. And it'll save the geometry out and the materials as well. So it'll actually save any of the Autodesk materials that we've already got set up. It will automatically use them, and it will save them out for us. It'll also take out our lights as well. So it takes the whole model out. Now it can be quite heavy, can be these files. So you might find if you've got quite a big Revit file, the FBX file is even bigger. It's not going to be a file you'd want to email. Okay. So I could FBX it out. I could send it off. As it is, because I'm working on the same machine that I've got Max on, what we have is if you've got the building design suite or any of the other design suites, factory design, etc., when you actually go into the design package that you're using, whether that's AutoCAD, Inventor, Revit, we will have the suite workflows. So what the suite workflows allow me to do is allow me to take my model out to whichever visualization package I'm using. So in this case, I want to take 3ds Max. Now, is it an exterior? Is it interior? This just depends on how it creates the lighting. And we can actually, if I go to exterior render, I can go to the settings and we can choose what is going to happen. Yeah. So because it's an exterior, it doesn't take the lights. It'll take the geometry. So if there's any geometry for the lights, it will take that, but it will not take these lights out with it. So where I've got lights within my model, they will not go. But it doesn't really matter because maybe I'm only interested in doing an external render. If you're wanting to do an external render at night and you've got some lights outside your building, maybe lit bollards, you would need to make sure that was ticked to make sure that they go across. Okay. And the other thing we've got as well is the ability to combine entities. So this again, and I'll show you how this works. So within Revit, that window object has got a frame and glass. So that is two separate bits of material that are going to go out. So what it's going to do is it's going to create within Max something that we call a multi-sub-object material, and I'll show you what that is in a second as well. So let's come in, let's go to Suite Workflow, exterior render, and then what I can do is I can go run. Okay. What it will now do is it will now ask me, what do I want to do? Is this a new Max scene? Is it an existing? Is it the active one? So I'm going to go to the active 3ds Max session, choose this blank one. So that's the blank drawing which I've just started, and then I'm going to go continue. And notice also it says will be updated. Now what that means is if I'm now going to carry on designing within Revit, it shouldn't be a problem, because if we just come across here, so here's now my Revit file, yeah, it's come across quite nicely, okay, and it's fetched all the geometry across, and it's fetched the default camera, which is the camera from the 3D view, okay. Oops, let's just yeah, so at the moment you see the exposure control is a little bit out there, but we can change that later on. Again, I just need to make sure that in here, mental ray, yeah, we can start to look at the physical settings, but we'll worry about that later. Let's just set that back to there. So yeah, so depending on the scene and the lighting, let's just go to the scene lights. Yeah, it depends on what's going on. So there's my model come across. Okay, now I mentioned about this creating everything as multi-subcategory materials. So we've got this window in here that's fetched across. If I go to my material palette, if I select a blank material, one of the things I can do, as well as creating new materials, is I can gather materials that are already being used in this scene. So if I came in and I go pick material, I can pick this window, and this is what we refer to as a multi-subcategory material, yeah, or multi-sub-object material. So as you can see, I've got the glass and I've got the sash. Okay, so what I can then do is I can change now the glass material. I'm actually going to change this to be, rather than be one of the Autodesk material libraries. So whenever you're using an Autodesk product now, the material libraries are common across all products. The material library you use in AutoCAD is the same material library that you can use in Showcase, Inventor, Revit, and 3ds Max, and it means that there's a compatibility between the materials across there. Okay. If I want to, though, once I get into here, I can start to utilize the Arc and Design materials. So these are a slightly higher res material. So now I've gone to grey. I'm actually going to come into here and I'm going to set this up to the glass thin geometry. Okay. So that has now not only changed the glass in that material, but it's changed the glass everywhere, because the name glass here, look, is common. So wherever that material is being used, I've now just overridden it. Okay, so it does allow me to have quite a nice effect, okay, on this glass. Now you'll notice that to try and speed up the optimization of my viewports, it degrades our materials, and then as I wait now, you'll see it's actually becoming clearer, because it's actually almost giving us a part render in the background. Yeah. So we've now got our model over here, but of course I've started to change some materials, but the architect's been the architect and he's continuing to do some work in here. Okay. So it might be that in this case, let's just go to one of our elevations, and let's create a copy of this material to say that window. Okay, so I'm going to have that window in twice. Hit save, and what I want to now do is I now want to force that change across. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come back into here. I'm going to save this scene as well. So we'll just do a save, and we'll call it Revit test. Okay. In fact, let's just do a save as and save that somewhere. Where have I saved it? 3ds Max scenes. Okay. Make sure I know which folder I've put it in. Okay. I'm going to reset that. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back into here and I'm going to do a sweet workflow again. And it's the exterior scene. Yeah. Settings. Now what I can do here is I can actually change what's going across, because it's going to include information here, yeah. But I've actually got materials here, so use the max scene material definition. So this is now where I've actually updated it, and then it says here, keep the max scene material definition on reload. So anywhere where I've actually updated the materials, and I've started now to customize these, as long as that's ticked, it means that when it updates now, it will update the geometry, but it will not update the material definitions. Okay, so we'll just run this. And then what it'll do is it'll say, right, remember this box here, is it a new max scene? Is it the active one, or is it an existing one? It's an existing one, because I want it to update an existing scene. So I can come into here now, and let's just find that where I'd saved it to, which was, I believe, the Simon Dickinson documents. I think it was under 3ds Max, scenes. And then in here we had the Revit test. There we go. Yeah. Saved. I've forgotten an older one there, but this is the one that we've just done. Okay. And then I'm going to hit continue. Okay. In fact, what it's probably going to do now is it'll probably, because I've got that scene already open, it's probably going to launch another session of Max, which is absolutely fine. But hopefully, when it comes across, our glass material will still be the same, but we should have an extra window in there. So it's going to take a little bit longer because it is launching a new session of 3ds Max for me. Okay, so it's just now transforming the data. This is our startup window, yeah, which allows us to start new drawings with a template. I'm just going to close that down. Okay, and in good old fashion, that's only fetched across my new window, which it shouldn't have done. It should have added that into the scenes. Let's see if it's maybe is it still loaded in the background. Nope, it's failed. That's very annoying. That should live demos can never be trusted for it. Let's have a look. Exterior settings. Yeah, that should have. Not 100% sure why that's not worked, but we'll come back to why that's not worked later. Okay. So let's just go back into this one and just relaunch that Revit test scene. Okay. So that should have updated, which why it hasn't, I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it's because this session was still holding a lock. I suspect there's a file lock on that other file from this session. Okay. So I can then now start to create other objects in here, everything from additional scenes, additional settings, etc. So we've got in here the ability to create people. So this is the populate stuff that was added in a few years ago, and it's a very powerful set of tools. So if I go to create workflow, yeah, I can actually, in fact my scaling is completely wrong on here, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scale that and start reset that scene. Okay, so I can create characters, animated characters, now using a populate set of tools incredibly quickly. So what we've got here is we've got a walkway. I can add other walkways that intersect that. We can have them crossing, etc. as well. Okay. So what these allow us to do is each sort of pink dot was going to be a lady, each blue dot's going to be a gentleman, and we can then start to look at how this is populated. So is it, we can have people walking quickly, we can have so many people running. Okay, we can set the male and female sort of ratio. Okay, and then what I can then start to do is I can start to simulate this information. I'm just going to hit simulate, and what this will do is this will actually give me a simulated crowd, if you like, walking. Now, although this creates an animation, I use this quite a lot within a still environment because it still gives me characters and it still gives me the idea of scale. Okay, so we'll just give this a chance to come up, and that's now populated that. If I hit the play button on my ribbon at the bottom, it's actually now animated all these people. Yeah, and this is an out-of-the-box function. Yeah, and they're quite high-res characters that we can actually have to give scale. Now, as well as being able to create these flow areas, which I've just done as well, we can also have, let's reset. Yeah, we can also create idle areas. Yeah, so the idle area will allow me to create a crowd. And in here we've got groups of people, we've got individuals, we've got some groups of people talking to each other. And we can control whether the groups are 2, groups of 3. The randomness and the way that that's generated can all be simulated as well. So I can come back into here, I can hit simulate, and this will now create a crowd for me. Okay, so these will be people doing various things, talking on mobile phones, chatting to each other. Okay, and the interactions are quite nice as well. So if I actually hit play, we can actually see that there's various interactions. There's some people are going to get duplicated. There's only a set number of amount of characters, but we can, if we've got 2 characters like here where it's the same random character, we can start to customize that later as well and control that. The other thing that we've got is we've actually got these created a seat person as well. So again, I'm just going to do a quick reset. And if I actually put a character in and a seat, yeah, we can actually create multiple seats in here, yeah, and we can start to maneuver these around. So I've got 2 seats, and as soon as I face each other, yeah, when we're not facing each other, there's no interaction. But what this line's doing is it's saying that it understands that these boxes are within a set distance of each other. And therefore, if I simulate this, it will create an interaction between these 2 characters. So it won't look totally random. It won't look out of place. It'll actually look like we've got some interaction here. So again, just to add this extra level of detail to our scenes, if I come into there and just hit play, yeah, when one's talking, the other one's listening and vice versa. So we're just starting to get a little bit of interaction there, yeah. And again, we wouldn't normally zoom this far in, but we would have them. They could be sat on a couple of seats interacting within a canteen or cafeteria, etc. We can just add that next level of realism and scale within our scenes as well, okay. There's various other effects that we can add in as well. For instance, within our setup, so if I actually go to render setup, there is various different effects that we can actually start adding in. In fact, so let's go to number, the lighting effects. Yeah, so in here we've got the ability to add some atmosphere effects, etc. in here. Now, if I took, for instance, back to our Revit model, yeah, it may be that I came here and I set up a camera in here. So we could actually have a camera view looking in that direction. So whenever you use the workflows, any cameras that you've set up will automatically be taken out. So if I just, let's just close that down, don't save that. And then in here, let's just do a reset, don't save. Okay, and let's just push this out as being an interior render, yeah, And let's run that. Take that out to the active scene to that one, continue. That way it's much quicker because it doesn't have to launch Max. Okay, so here we have our scene. If I hit C, here's my camera. Yeah. Just a bit of advice as well, whenever you actually do set a camera up, it's always very useful to basically set the view up to do what we call show safe frames, because this is actually, this border you're looking at now is actually what's going to render. Yeah, depending on the size of the image, whether you're widescreen, etc., that's what's actually going to render. So it's very quick for us to get that information in there. And again, we can start to look at how that looks. So we can put that in a realistic. I could actually illuminate that with the scene lights, again, by using our exposure control in here. Yeah, so this is actually external at the moment. We can then start to adjust the brightness and how the lighting is going to come into here. Yeah, we can also start to go, shadows are on, cool. Yeah, so we can start to understand how the lighting effects are going to work in here. If I had any artificial lights in there, we could start to calculate them. We could start to add effects like glare. Now, that particular camera shot there is one that I've actually rendered in the past. So this is actually that same scene. I've taken that across to Max. I've added a couple of effects into here. So the character that I've put in there, I've actually put some motion blur on, because as you saw from the populate ones, from a distance, they're probably going to be okay. If they're close up, you're probably going to have issues with them. So what we can do here is by putting some blur onto the character, we still get the concept of scale. Yeah, so it's still giving us idea of scale of this area. But more importantly, your eyes are not focused onto her. You focus more onto the scene, and you're looking at the elements that I'd like you to look at. In fact, most people are probably looking at New York in the background at the moment. And again, the same thing, there's a special effect there on the lights as well. So we've got this glare shader. So this is a glare effect. And again, it's just trying to add that next level of realism. Because if you did take a photo of them lights, you're probably not going to see every detail of them. You're probably going to get a bit of white out from the exposure from them lights. It's very easy in Max to get a scene that looks good, but technically it's not brilliant. Now, the one thing that I would love to have done, this is added a bit of depth of field in there, so that you've got objects blurred within the background, etc. So there is workflows now set up between all the major Autodesk products and 3ds Max. Yeah, there's some very, very good tools in here and very good workflows. The time it took me to go from that camera shot to hitting the render button on this scene was probably about 2.5 to 3 hours tops. So I could hit render, I could walk away. Now the problem I had back then is when I hit render, I had to wait overnight for that to render. I rendered this about 5 years ago, so my technology was a lot slower than what it is now. Technology's improved an awful lot, and what we also have now within 3ds Max for the first time, yeah, is I have the ability now, as you can probably see just coming into shot there, it's the render in the Autodesk A360. So I can now send my Max files and I can render them in the cloud. Yeah, obviously there is a cost to rendering the cloud as far as your cloud credits go, but it does mean that it leaves your machine so you can carry on working. Do be aware though there is also a maximum resolution as well. Okay, so if you wanted a very, very high resolution image, then you're going to struggle if you're using the cloud to actually render. Okay, it is going to give you some limitations. But what we also have is there's other renderers built into the way that we work. So at the moment, I've been using Mental Ray and showing you that today. So we actually have in here as well, we've got something called iRay. So iRay is it's an iterative renderer. So it renders slightly different. It gives a slightly different effect, yeah. But one of the advantages is Mental Ray, to get the image correct, you've got to render it out to its extent, okay. Whereas if I use the iRay, what I can actually do in here is I can actually render this based on time. So if I just want to get the best result I can in 1 minute, then that's what I'm going to get, okay. If I go unlimited, then I can leave it rendering and it will get better and better and better, and I can stop it when I want. Okay. Whereas the Mental Ray one, you set your parameters, you set your resolution, you set all the different settings for how the light's calculated, how Final Gather works. So Final Gather is how the light bounces in the scene. Then you hit render. You have to wait for it to finish, otherwise you will get blank areas on your imagery. It will not render evenly. So the iRay one will start to render evenly. So if I just do render, the other thing about iRay as well is it's hardware based. So what it will now do is it will actually transfer all the materials that it needs onto my graphics card. I'm in theory here, I haven't really played with the materials, but you can now start to see this generating these views up. So it's another way of working, and very little work there, but you can already start to see that the effect in there is quite good. Yeah, my exposure outside is a little bit extreme. I am internal, so I would sort of expect to get a little bit of whiteout through the window anyway. But this will render for 1 minute, or as I say, I can put it onto unlimited and leave it rendering. If you've got a second graphics card in your desktop, I'm actually using my laptop at the moment, but if you've got multiple graphics cards, then you can actually get iRay to utilize the GPUs on your additional graphics cards as well. So it's a much faster way of working. We've also got the ability to set up a render farm using 3ds Max. So if you've got plenty of high-powered machines that do nothing on an evening because everyone goes home, you can utilize them to do your renders. And we've got a lot of people out there that do set up render farms so that they can set their high-end renders up on an evening, and they're finished by the time they get in the morning. Okay. As I mentioned before, all the cameras that we've got can be animated as well, so it doesn't matter where the camera is at the moment. We've got a full timeline here that we can scrub, and we also have the ability to then do keyframe animation. So if I was to just create a quick external pass just around this entrance, I can create a new camera, and we'll just create a new target camera in here. Yeah, and let's just make sure that's actually where I want it to be. So we'll just maneuver that up, come to this one, change the camera to this new camera shot. I can actually create an auto key animation. Yeah, so we'll just make sure that's key to start with. I can then move my timeline, say to 100 frames, and then we can now move that to there. Okay. Turn off my timeline, and what we've now got is, just hit play, we've actually got an animation that we've set up. Yeah, it's a little bit jerky at the moment, but that's basically just the way that my computer's generated. Notice that my laptop struggled a little bit there, and it's actually turned it into wireframe. Yeah, and it's doing that on purpose. It'll regen just the same way as it did before. Okay, so that we can actually get the animation the way we want. Okay. Again, just be aware of the frames per second and the 10-second rule. So this is 100 frames, 30 frames a second. It's just over 3 seconds of animation once you rendered it out. Okay, and remember that you've got to render each frame, so it can slow things down when it comes to doing the renders later on. Okay, so the more animation you've got, the longer it's going to take to produce, and the more likelihood is that you're going to actually need a render farm. If you don't have a render farm and you've got an animation that you want to render out, get in touch with us. We have our own visualization studio anyway, but we also have the equipment that we can actually charge you to use. So there's a cost involved in that, but we can actually do the render and the hard work for you, and we've got the hardware in place to be able to do that. So hopefully that's been a really good introduction to the way that the software works and the way that these workflows are actually interacting as well. Thank you very much for spending an hour with me this afternoon. Hopefully that's been useful. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to drop me a line and I'll answer them later on. My contact details are there, so again, if you do want to just drop me a line via email rather than at the end of this presentation, again, feel free to do so. And again, thank you very much for your time. See you all soon.